Well, hello, and greetings from Sunrise here in Chicago. So one goal of this conference is to better understand how Muslims and Christians encounter each other as we respond together to the critical environmental issues that affect all of us. Also, how we understand the environments we inhabit as a shared natural resource and are thus spurred on to collective, collaborative action. This paper examines interreligious encounter in the context of disaster, the Mennonite Central Committee Response to the December 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami that resulted in the deaths of over 167,000 people in Aceh, Indonesia. I reflect on how working and learning together in the context of catastrophe and loss provided space for new understanding of how environmental issues may be perceived in another's religious framework. We know that many so-called natural disasters are caused or intensified by the effects of human changes on the environment. Although the 2004 earthquake and Indian Ocean tsunami were not results of global environmental degradation caused by human activity, they themselves did cause ecological changes and environmental damage. This context includes a second disaster in Aceh that also bore environmental effects, a violent separatist conflict between a provincial independence movement and the Indonesian central government that simmered in the province for 3 decades, in which an estimated 15,000 people died. This was still active at the time of the tsunami. Aceh had long been known as the veranda of Mecca, a strong conservative Islamic province where some rejected the secular Indonesian state and sought the implementation of Sharia, a move which officially began in 1999 and was later accelerated after the tsunami. It was into this context that the humanitarian response to the tsunami entered, and several years of reconstruction occurred. With massive losses following the tsunami and political will to finally end the conflict, a peace agreement for special autonomy was signed on 15 August 2005, ending these 3 decades of conflict. In the years immediately following this, Aceh had accelerated implementation of Sharia in the region that accompanied the tsunami's physical response. During the conflict, Aceh had been largely cut off from the outside world by the Indonesian government's military operations and state of emergency that restricted outsiders' access to Aceh. The tsunami disaster response brought novel interreligious interactions to the province. Many Acehnese told early relief workers that this was the first time that they had met non-Muslims in their lives. And many students and faculty colleagues told me that I was the only Christian that they knew on a personal level. Of the many actors that were involved in post-tsunami reconstruction, one of them was Mennonite Central Committee, MCC. Some staff are shown here, along with partners. MCC is a Christian relief and development organization that worked with 24 partners to implement 84 projects for 3.5 years of response, from 2005 to 2008. At the conclusion of MCC's term in Aceh, the state university rector noted that the longest term support for Aceh's devastated institutions of higher education came from MCC. As part of that response, I served in Acehnese universities and Islamic institutes for 3 years of teaching and training and research, and much of my learning came from the close interactions with students and colleagues in that context. So in this conference, we are considering environmental impacts. Alongside the tragic loss of human life, environmental effects of the tsunami included the following: massive amounts of debris and solid waste from buildings destroyed and carried by the wave, short-term inundation and salinization of fields, crops, and soils, sand and other materials layered on top of fields and soils, damage to coastal mangroves, loss of trees, erosion and scouring or land or soil loss, intense resource use, including of wood in reconstruction with demand for many new materials, and from the earthquake, subsidence of shorelines into the ocean and uplifted coral reefs above the ocean surface, especially in offshore islands. Some MCC responses to these environmental losses, including included cleaning out open shallow wells of debris, mud, and salt water with a pump, allowing fresh groundwater to infiltrate into the wells, as most houses in Aceh have an open well about 80 centimeters across. There was also cleaning of debris from fields and irrigation canals to recover their productive use, planting of native trees for economic use, such as melinjo, and promoting research on the tsunami's effects on soils and crops to permit farmers in seeking support for recovering their fields, soils, and livelihoods. Through my work on campus, I came to understand conceptualizations of loss and risk in new ways. One of the things I did was to teach qualitative research methods in the Faculty of Agriculture at Chiaquala University. This course offered theory and practice of research approaches for working with farmers and community development programs. I included a short unit on participatory rural appraisal and participatory mapping. I explained that this is often used to elicit research participants' insider perspectives on spatial arrangements and priorities, social relationships, and many aspects of local knowledge, as people indicate their areas of particular expertise or awareness by including something on a map. In a practice exercise, these undergraduate small student teams set about independently, separated from other groups, to produce a map of the university campus to practice this technique. I gave an assignment without any additional prompting of what they might include on the map. I expected fairly similar maps of paths, of various faculty buildings, and students' social hubs. But what the students produced astonished me. There were few administrative or faculty buildings drawn, and none was labeled. All of the maps included the campus mosque. Roads were meticulously thorough. In place of educational features, all of the maps included multiple markers of conflict. A road leaving campus was labeled Jalan Rawan, a dangerous road that no student would travel after dark. Locations on campus where people had reported attacks or been found dead. And 2 maps extended beyond the campus to include asterisks, where the rectors of the State Islamic University Institute Araniri and their own Chiaquala University had been fatally shot in 2000 and 2001, respectively. Indeed, before some of these students had even been enrolled as students, but it was still part of their collective campus associations. When the teams presented their maps, students realized that these maps reflected their perspectives, whose lived reality of the sporadic conflict was so dominant that it dwarfed their academic experience on campus. And for me, this was a complete reset on a focus from the effects of the tsunami to effects of the conflict. Realized that that was what was dominant, ongoing in my students' minds. Other assignments yielded similar results. I had students interview a farmer for 20 to 30 minutes about how their agricultural production changed in 2005 as a result of the tsunami. I anticipated reports of problems with salinity, disrupted irrigation, or perhaps market shifts, but the assignments that I received back contained mostly effects of the conflict, including economic loss after prolonged absence from distant fruit plantations, produce taken without payment, and production irregularities that resulted from the unstable civil disruption. One student produced a vigorously handwritten document of more than 30 pages, detailing the progression of Aceh's conflict and its impacts on one farm family, which he said is just what came out when the student began to interview a farmer about his post-tsunami tomato production. So through this, I came to see the environmental effects of the conflict beyond the more visible effects of the tsunami, which were the rehabilitation reconstruction's focus of those years. Professor Yusni Sabi, who was then rector of the State Islamic Institute EIN Araniri, often said this, which I found very surprising. As terrible as the December 2004 tsunami was, the effects of the protracted civil conflict were far worse on the Achenese population, and that he clearly detected this effect among his students. He explained that while people could understand the tsunami as a rapid natural disaster on some level, it was much more difficult for them to assimilate and to recover from the effects of the conflict, which had been prolonged and was deemed to be more of human origin than an act of God. While most of the reconstruction efforts were focused on the tangible effects of the earthquake and tsunami, the lasting effects of Aceh's sustained civil conflict were often primary in residents' minds, in part because of their distinctive understandings of the event's causality as of divine and human origin. And this allowed me to develop new understandings of the effects of spirituality on the natural world. We're considering today how spiritual values drive behavior, and this was clearly evident in Aceh. A widespread Achenese view of the tsunami's causality, and there's been very much research done on this, was always infused with religious meaning. The tsunami was believed to be an act of God, often believed to be in response to religious or moral shortcomings in the province. And since spiritual values drive behavior, one of the responses here was the accelerated implementation of Sharia in direct response to this spiritual understanding. I'll conclude with some reflections for our discussion here. This experience highlights the great potential that comes from accompanying religious others in situations of intersecting disaster, loss, and hope. The solid commitment to interreligious working together to overcome disaster bears important lessons for today's addressing of environmental crises facing humanity and natural systems worldwide. Through accompaniment in a context of loss across several years, Christian MCC workers and Achenese Muslim colleagues developed mutual care and trust and openness toward each other, especially remarkable given the previously closed context of Aceh during the conflict. Achenese often remarked that we could understand each other because we were people of faith. As deeply religious people, what the Achenese found confusing or disturbing was the prevalence of agnostic or atheistic aid workers who also worked in the reconstruction process in those years. As fellow people of faith, we could discuss our moral starting points, and there was a shared reference to God as creator who is active in the world, rather than a framework that places all of nature's purpose for human exploitation. So there are some lessons for us in addressing environmental issues today. As with the mapping exercise I gave to my students, do we practice openness toward asking, from your perspective, what is the problem? What is dreaded? What is the fear? It may not be what we think. And understanding the root of people's environmental concerns can point toward unexpected ways forward. After the tsunami and the conflict, it was hard for Achenese to return to their changed lands and to re-engage with their natural environment related to the sea, such as fishing or going to the beach. Emotions, fears, and loss, including around ecological loss, are all intermixed, and they cannot just be set to one side. May we ask the questions of what people's real concerns may be around environmental loss and also around changing behaviors that respond to and address environmental harm. And we must listen attentively for the different responses. So this conference asks, are Christians and Muslims prepared to work together on such an acute problem? May this example of working together in disaster response hold hope and maybe making a way forward in collective action to address other environmental issues. Thank you.